a channel that is dedicated to creative work. We're talking about music, we're talking about art, we're talking about book writing and publishing, dance, theater, and related fields. Today with us, we have two well-known writers from Malaysia, Dr. Chuah, Guat and Dr. Aneeta Sundararaj. And it's my pleasure to welcome them to Opinions. Thank you very much for both of you to be here today. Can I call you Guat and Aneeta?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
It's my pleasure. Now we can straight get into some background. I've read all some of your books, and I've read about your background and your involvement in literary works in Malaysia. Perhaps I could start with Guat. You read literature at University of Malaya way back in the 1960s, right?
Yes.
And then you spent some time professionally in the advertising industry.
Yes.
And then later on, I think 20-something, maybe you could help me on that. You got in seriously into writing. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit on that one.
No, actually, I started writing, and I started writing a long time ago. I had one or two short stories published in Her World, and that was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
But life caught up with me, and I didn't have the time to do that until 1992. There was a short story competition run by Shell in New Straits Times.
NST, yeah.
Yes, and I entered 4 or 5 stories, and they all got published.
Wow.
Yeah, so that gave me the encouragement and the feeling that, maybe I can write a novel. I had tried writing before,
Right.
but ended up burning the book because I felt I wasn't getting anywhere with it. But after the experience of writing a story per week, because I gave myself the deadline, I will do a story a week, and I found that I could do it. I could do it.
And this was what, in 19 what?
This was 1990s, 1992.
1992.
The
It's early
1990s.
90s.
Then 1994, I told myself I would write my novel.
Right.
And
That's when you wrote your first book.
Novel, yeah.
Yeah. I see.
Well, yeah, the first novel. I had written short stories before.
Okay. Okay. And what was the title of the first book that you?
Echoes of Silence.
Is that the one that's being translated into various languages now?
Well, it's been translated into Italian.
Right.
That was recently, and then into German 2 years ago, and it's now being translated into Chinese by a university in China.
Right. That's really something, right?
It is, isn't it? Yes.
I do not know many writers here whose books have been translated into such languages, Italian, German, and things like that. I'm not sure.
Possibly Tan Tuan Eng's books have been translated.
Okay.
But the difference between himself and me is that he has published with a publisher and he has a literary agent.
Right.
I never had one.
Okay.
There was just me. I published my own book, and my book has gone out to people.
Wow.
And they have found it worthwhile translating.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what about you, Aneeta? Can you give us a background? Because all I know is that you've been trained as a lawyer, and you have a PhD in management as well, and then somehow you got into writing. Perhaps you could just elaborate.
I trained and practiced as a lawyer for 5 years.
Okay.
And then I decided to leave the firm. And when I left, I knew it would take me about 3 months to get another job. In those 3 months, I started writing. And
So it was just like out of the blue.
not so much out of the blue. I'd always been...
One, for example, the background is literature, right?
No, mine was mainly law,
Yeah,
but
so-
I always liked stories,
Okay,
always. So then my godmother said to me, well, if you really want to write, then write. Don't just talk about it.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, 3 months I'll give myself. I'm just can't do very much except
Yeah.
wait. So at the end of 3 months, I had the manuscript for The Banana Leaf Men.
Right.
And I really didn't know what it meant. So I decided to self-publish, not because I didn't get an agent or
Sure,
an
sure.
editor. I wanted to know what it was like to do it on my own,
The entire process.
because I'd been told so much during legal practice that the last thing I wanted was for someone else to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So that was basically how it
Right.
started, but it was baptism by fire.
Yeah, yeah.
So I learned a lot from that one
Right.
process.
Experience,
Then life came like her. I had parents to look after.
yeah. Sure.
Then, while that was going on, I wrote the manuscript for The Age of Smiling Secrets.
Yeah.
And by 2011-12, I had an agent. And but again, life got in the way. It didn't happen. We didn't get a publisher. She wanted me to change it fundamentally, the story. And we parted ways. And then Daddy became ill. So I looked after him. And then after he died, it so happened I was picking up the pieces of my life, and I entered one of the chapters, chapter 9, into the Commonwealth. They had a call for submission for stories about indenture.
Right.
From those who are descendants of those of indenture. So I sent in a story which was Legends of Nagakanna, and it was accepted.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, okay, so it's worthy of being published.
Sure.
And then I was tired. I got tired of all this agent, literary agent, all that. So I thought, I've done it before, so why not do it again? So I did. And that was when 2018 was when it was published.
Yeah.
She was at the launch with me in the panel.
Right.
And after that, life carried on again.
Sure,
and,
sure.
it got shortlisted for the Anugerah Buku by the National Library of Malaysia.
Right.
And while that was all going on, the short stories were also happening.
Yeah.
So it's just
Simultaneously. Okay.
yeah, simultaneously. So then in 2024, this was published by Penguin.
Right.
But the short stories, by the time I had the collection, I had already submitted many of the stories here, there, and everywhere.
Sure.
So this collection contains the stories in their proper form, because when you submit to competitions, you have to reduce by the number of words and various things to do.
Comply with those requirements. Right.
I mean, for example, Uncharted Waters is one that is 2,000 words. It was nominated for the Pushcart Award, 2,000 words, but here it's 4,900 words because you get the complete story.
Sure.
So these are all the stories in this long-listed, short-listed, award-winning. So that was good. And that's
And
where we
both
are.
of you also were writing in newspapers, right? From what I know. Are you writing for Star newspaper?
No, NST.
NST yourself?
I've only, when requested, I will write reviews for
Oh, yours is reviews.
book reviews, but I've also submitted essays for newspapers.
Right.
And of course, I have also written academic articles. I
Right.
wrote about
Yes.
Aneeta's book, for instance,
Okay.
which was submitted to Diaspora Matters, based in they're based in India, Jawaharlal Nehru University.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So I've also written academically.
Okay. Yeah, I went through some of your background. You've also done in journals and also in journals, peer-reviewed journals, and so on.
Yeah.
Before I go on to the international work that you have done and she has done, let's talk a little bit more of your other books, Guat. Can you elaborate a little bit of the stories there? And why do you, I went through some of them, and you have this knack for, relating everything to what we call the rural areas and things like that. So maybe you could just elaborate.
Yeah. Well, first of all, The Echoes of Silence was the first novel.
Yeah.
When I finished it, I knew I had to write a second novel because it was a murder mystery, and at the end of it, the perpetrator confesses, But one of the people who was listening, he was listening, but he never spoke a word. So I said, no, I must allow him to speak.
Right.
So then came the second novel.
Okay.
Right. And why are they about rural things? Well,
You were born in Rimbau, wasn't it?
Rambau, yeah.
Carry on, Kiran.
Yeah. But I grew up in Port Klang.
Okay.
Right. I grew up in Port Klang and went to school in Klang and VI and all that. But no, I think it's because the first book, because I was trying to, I had a question. I had a question that I was trying to answer with my novel.
Right.
You know, you write philosophy books to answer the questions you have about life. I write fiction to answer questions. My question was, at that time in 1994, my big issue was justice in this country, the justice system.
Right.
I was very affected by the Operation Lalang and by the constitutional crisis we had with the justices and so on. And my question then was, why is it that we Malaysians put up with so much that is wrong? And I then asked, is it because of our colonial background? Is it because of our cultural background? Whatever, is it just our nature, you know? So that was...
Right. That was what you were addressing, or you are
Yeah. So because of the colonial background, part of the action had to take place in a plantation, of course, because of our, our history. So that's why the second novel, which is a sort of like a sequel, questions corruption in this country and how in the name of progress and modernization, how we have destroyed our country through corruption, through lack of care for the rural people, especially.
So you weave your stories, although it's a fiction, but that relates to real life in our country.
Yes.
That's how you approached it, right?
The real life political, ecological issues.
So just like Aneeta, when I read your book, there is a little bit of what we call thing on the Sharia law and then the civil law. That's something to do with that effect.
It was, in one sentence, The Age of Smiling Secrets is a story about a family torn apart because the husband converts to Islam. And without the knowledge of the wife, converts their child as well. Like Guat, I also asked the question, why, or more to be more precise, because at the time when I wrote it, which was 2005, 2006, 2007, there was a judgment of court that said that the custody is given equally to mother and father, but the child remains with the mother, but she must not influence the child. I was not interested in the law. Everybody can go and look online. I was more fascinated by how do you not influence your child? You know, you can. So there's a scene in there where the mother takes the child to bed, and she has to sleep alone because she doesn't know. I mean, I remember my mother used to tell me bedtime stories. What bedtime stories are you going to tell this child? You know, and how do you not influence the child? So, and again, I think the story, in part of it, you know, the girl grows up thoroughly confused because she doesn't know whether she's Nandini 1 minute or Nadia in the next minute. So that whole thing about how are we going to live? You know, so it's a concurrent jurisdiction because it's one of the few countries I know where we have both Sharia and civil law. So that confusion gave me fodder to work with.
Right.
You know, I do not sit here and say one is right, one is wrong. That's not my job. I do not see it. I just write a commentary, but put it in a way that is so in a work of fiction. So this is entirely fiction. So it's a possibility of what can go wrong. And then in the short story, there is a much shorter version of this. Similar story, it's called Metopia. But in Metopia, you fast forward 15 years. And, I come to the stage where we now have the metaverse. So, where in that story, the father uses the technology to obliterate the existence of a mother at all. So can we do that? Then, you have a situation. That was just pure imagination. So what happens when you take away mother-child? Almost a Brave New World kind of situation, but not so stark in your face. And of course, the short stories are all mental health related.
Sure.
So,
But that's an interesting approach. I mean, like I said, I read it. There are parts of it where it becomes very emotional. It's not just the ending. Many parts that you've addressed that. And then you went on to Tapestry of the Mind, which is a collection of stories. But here you're addressing something to do with mental wellness.
Mental health rather than mental disease, which is very important distinction. Because the professor that I quote from, he was the one who, I know it, it's not that I didn't, but during a conversation we had early on when we met, he said, I'm interested in mental health rather than the disease. So I thought that was very interesting because, it didn't occur to me because and then slowly through knowing him, also through experience, but really it didn't hit me until I knew him, how stark the difference was. Because most of the time, I come from a family of doctors, and if you tell them to go and see anyone to see a therapist, it's the end of the world. They have to go only to a doctor. And sometimes nobody needs a doctor. You don't need to go to a doctor because a psychiatrist deals with more in very basic terms, the chemical imbalance in your mind or, in your body physiology. But sometimes you just need somebody to talk to. And, a therapist, someone who is so objective and knows how to help you is far better than a psychiatrist. So that was a very telling thing for me. So that these stories, you're not going to find, somebody who has depression, somebody who has this or all those things. The stories are of everyday people. Uncharted Waters I told you about. Golden Illusion, which won the award, was about elder abuse. Because it happened while I was looking after my mother, because it would never occur to me or anybody within my circle to abandon your mother or your parents. We move our worlds to look after them. But in this story, I twisted the whole thing around, 180, and says about a child, a lady who grows older and older and older and more frail, and how she has become a burden to her daughter. And the consequences of how that is. It's sad, but so that seemed to resonate with quite a few people. So those are the two.
And what about your fourth book?
Oh, these two,
Four books.
actually, I have 5.
Okay, where's the other one?
The other one, that was not self-published.
Okay.
And explains why I have decided to remain self-published.
Okay.
That was done by a publishing house that never paid me a cent, that never told me what they sold or didn't sell.
This is quite common.
So I remain a self-published writer because...
What was that book about?
These are collections of short stories. These short stories started, when I was doing my PhD. I didn't have time to write my second novel but these stories came and I had to jot them down. So after I finished my PhD, a professor at a university said, "Are you going to publish your short stories?" In the meantime, they had appeared in magazines and things like that. And he offered to pay for the publishing of the books, of the stories into a book, because he said, "I can't use your text in class unless they've been published in a book." So I then decided that I would publish them. So that was this third book, The Old House, right? So they are short stories that came to me and I wrote them down. And so then came the second novel. Okay, the fourth book was written after I had done the second novel,
Okay.
right? This was in 2010. In 2014, I finished the other stories
Right.
that I had begun when I was doing my PhD and published them in Dream Stuff, right?
And that's the one you are saying, or translated into a Spanish, Slovenian?
No, those are from the first book,
Okay, okay,
first volume, because in between they had been, they had been published in magazines and things. And when I went to Slovenia in 2002, this had not yet been done.
Okay.
But they had seen the stories in magazines and things.
Okay, in other
So
media. I see,
in
I
other
see.
media. So
So let me ask you a very important question. I think this is something we did discuss. Just like in every segment of arts, right? You have the celebrities, and then you have the purists, and then you have people in between, right? Or the commercial side, the celebrities, and then the real guys who actually think they are doing something great, and they have a different view of things, right? They stick to the old way of thinking. So, how do you see this from writers' point, right? From the writers' point, the celebrity writers, and then so-called good writers, and then I would add great writers. Have you seen such things happening in the industry?
do you want to go first?
Okay. All right. So you had celebrity writer, good writer, great writer.
Sure.
I will, yes, I can picture them, but I will also add a little bit about what I studied during the PhD, because this was one of the things that I did. I've been to a few of these festivals, so there is literary festivals. Yeah. So my nature is to observe, so I observed. And there are celebrity authors, they are the ones who have social media, they're on the phone. I remember I've never ever encountered this where I sat at a dinner and, this gentleman sat in front of me. And for 2 hours, he didn't say a word to me because he was just on the phone taking photos and, whatever, doing on Instagram. So that I would call is a celebrity author. I think he has a lot of followers. I don't know because I'm not so popular on Instagram and social media. And yeah, they usually have an entourage now. And a good writer, yes, recently
So,
I went...
sorry, the backtrack. So are you saying celebrity writers can be also called dumb writers?
Not necessarily. They cannot be called dumb because they have a book. So, you have to have that much respect for them that they had the discipline.
But if somebody doesn't talk to you for 2 hours,
well,
how do you look at it?
I just think that's his fault. That's his problem. What can I do? I can't, go and force him to talk to me. So that's him. It's just, he's obviously a celebrity of some sort. That's fine. So observation, and
So are you saying
I don't have anything in common to talk to him. That's one of the things.
All
And
right. Let me ask you. So when you say celebrity author, then they are on Instagram, the social media. They have a group of followers, right? So they're kind of celebrity. But how many books do they actually sell?
I don't know, but I look at the quality of writing as well.
Yeah.
It's not something that interests me.
Right.
Okay? And yeah, that's one. Then you have the good writer who is sometimes really very good, but he may not have the celebrity writer often has an entourage. Someone following him. He has a manager, a photographer, this, that. I'm not putting them down. I'm saying that's how I classify them.
Yeah.
Then you have the good writer who may not necessarily have all that, but his work is really good, and the great one, because it's someone like Salman Rushdie. He's good and he knows how to do this, he's been at it. And I mean, Salman Rushdie, William Dalrymple most recently, they're good writers, they write very well and they have mastered the art of marketing themselves.
Right.
So those are how I classify them. Not one of them is bad, they're not bad because they have had the discipline to finish a book. So
Right,
they must have something,
Sure.
you know, and yeah, so that's how I.
Then
And
maybe
when I
they
did,
have a very poor social skills, but social media they're good at.
yes,
But one-on-one they're not good at it.
yeah,
It's just the
maybe
way they
that
are.
too. But also when I studied, when I was doing the research for the PhD, it's the Beatrix Potter. I never forgot her because she is one of the most celebrated authors of all time. And my PhD was on this, you know, how did they sustain it? So every time you buy a Beatrix Potter book, you know, there's money going. And she had a lawyer for a husband. So, you know, all the patents, copyrights, all those
legal
were done.
aspects, yeah.
So that's what fascinates me. How do they all manage?
It becomes a business.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the distinction that I made. You know, once you write, as you write, we write. I love it, you know, the passion of writing. Once I finish the manuscript, then I have to think like a business person. How am I going to manage this? How am I going to do this? You know,
You're to wear a different
this
hat.
this becomes a product but to get it to the state that I am happy, I have to go through all the pain of writing, the pain, the joy, the bliss, everything, you know. So
Yeah, in other words, when you publish on you have control over the creative process.
yes.
Right? And creative thoughts, right? Yeah. That's how it is, yeah. What about, Guat, what's your opinion on this? Celebrating great, good, what do you think?
I must say, I haven't given much thought to the whole thing because all I want to say is, you know, good luck to whoever, you know, whatever you want to do as a writer. I have known people whose one aim in life is purely to have something in print, right?
So they have a passion to write a book, and they get it out.
I don't know about the passion in writing, but they're passionate about seeing a book with their name there as the
Right.
author.
Obviously, they must write it, right?
Well,
Well,
I
at least
say
a
to
ghostwriter,
people like
yeah.
that because some of them cannot write,
So,
right? And they come to me and they kind of like expect me to either rewrite or help them out or whatever. And I say, look, I said, what do you want to do as a writer? I said, you've got to decide. If you want to be a writer, you've got to write and you've got to learn how to write. So that means whatever language you choose to write in, you've got to be a master of that language, right? But if all you want is to see your name there as author by so and so, I said the best thing is if you have a story, go to a ghostwriter.
right, yes.
And get the ghostwriter to write for you.
Yeah.
Right? And then your nightmare is over. You don't have to deal with Chuah telling you you can't write like this, or you know your English is not good enough.
Yeah.
You don't need to deal with it. Go right ahead and do it. And then you are known as an author. Who is to know who's the ghost?
Sure. And now with this chat GPT out there,
Exactly.
and the other softwares that is available, I mean, if you want to write just to put your name, it's all available.
Yes.
The tools are available, right?
Yes.
So it's no need to go and look for ghostwriters and all that. Right?
Exactly.
But if you really want to be proud that this is your own work, right, and then you want to put your name, then you have to write it yourself, right, and get someone to edit or you edit yourself.
I think it's like this. Sometimes we write because, like in my case, I write because I have issues that I want to deal with.
Sure.
And I don't know how to deal with it except through the telling of a story.
Right.
Then it must be done.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, I get depressed and I get unhappy and I'm a misery to everybody around me. You know what I mean?
Yes. And
You're going to get it out.
And the only way I know how to do it is by telling stories.
Yeah.
so which is cathartic and sometimes therapy in itself.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's cathartic or therapeutic or whatever, but it's like when you write books on philosophy because you philosophize your way out of issues that you have.
The kind of troubles So the kind of questions that ring in your head, right?
Exactly.
We know that these questions have not been asked by others before.
Yeah.
They've asked for thousands of years,
Yeah.
and they continue to ask even now.
Yeah.
We still don't have answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have what we call want to say what we want to say, our opinion. Right?
Yeah.
So we put it in print,
Yeah.
and then we call ourselves authors.
No,
Well,
not necessary.
yeah, but in my
No, I'm
case,
talking a jest.
it's more than just. I cannot
It's
write
okay.
a book on philosophy, and I'm not really capable of doing a sort of a survey of what great thinkers have thought of this issue. I don't do that. The only way I know how to deal with it is by telling a story. Yeah, telling stories.
That's very interesting.
There is also one part to it, which for me, following on from what she says, there is a moment of bliss,
Yeah.
which I achieve. Analogy, when you play music, I've seen those videos, I've watched you. There is a point at which, you go into yourself and nobody can reach you.
Sure.
Same with my stories.
Yeah.
There's a point at which when I write, it is so blissful. I can't think of any other word. And sometimes I put it away and then I read what I've written and I'm like, and it's like a sense of peace, joy, everything that comes from within.
Sure.
Yeah, there are mistakes. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I know. And if you ask me, AI, ChatGPT, all those things happen. Yes, I am sure that there are other authors who are better than me, and their works are nicer and it's perfect. But did they write it? Did they experience what I experienced? And I hold that so dearly that I will continue to do that.
Yeah. So that comes back to the fundamental question: why do you write?
Bliss. To experience
so
bliss
you
on
can
a
use all
regular
these tools
basis.
and so on. But that's not going to get you into the zone, and that's not going to actually make you feel so good that right or wrong doesn't matter, good or bad doesn't matter, but you got it out yourself. I think that human element is very important, not just in writing, in many things that we do. And I look at all this technology is important. They will help you. They will help you shape certain things, right? But so far, even in music, they've been using tech-based tools since late early 80s. They've been doing it, and you don't have the human feel. But it's the question of how do you combine both, the best of both worlds, and still make it sound whatever work that they're doing. It's the human element is there. So that's how I look at it, and so yeah, that's interesting, right?
I'll tell you a story about my nephew and what I did about writing, AI, all those things. So when my nephew was born, he was born in 2000. And when he was born, I realized he would not know about a couple, which is my grandparents, who left India, came to make a life in Malaysia. So I set about putting all the papers together, the photos together, and so on and so forth. To this day, there is a letter because on my mother's side, when the woman marries, she changes her first name as well. So she was born Chandra Barve and she became Indra Patrudan. So there is a letter from her father writing to certify that, my daughter was born Chandra Barve and she married and she's now Indra Patrudan. It is in the Marathi year of so and so and so. So it's handwritten by my great grandfather in beautiful English. He was a postmaster and it was dated 1935. So now every time I think about AI and ChatGPT, I think, if we were living in this world, we would have sent an email. Would we have had the same thing, And so I look at it and I'm like, no, we must continue to write. So each day I sit and write, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog just to keep on writing.
Right.
So, there's something about this motor skill, this human body, that if you don't continue doing it, you lose it. And that letter is very important. It's crumbling, so we've taken digital versions.
I see.
But so when you talk about AI, I have no solution.
Yeah, but for me also the other thing that I should share is that you can use technology. I'm using the broad word tech-based technology, but I think the real challenge comes when somebody asks you a question on what you've done, whether you're able to, deliver? Do you know your stuff? Then if you know, then it's fine because then it's assisting you. But if you do not know, then it also shows that there is a moment of truth, you see. So I think people have to know that part. I have seen that some of them will write some stories and share with me, but I know it's not written by them. I mean, you know that, and you know who's there. And if you want to write something heavy, then you need that kind of experience. If you don't have, you cannot, right? But then again, it's all subjective, right? We leave it to them to do what they want.
I was just wondering, going on from where we were talking about, the classification of celebrity writers, good writers, great writers, and all that. I think what a more important question, whether they have the right to do it is their business.
Sure.
But if we are concerned about that, then what we should worry about is whether we are teaching our younger generations to know how to distinguish between great work and not so great work. So the teaching of literature in schools is terribly important. So we are moving now to looking at the next generation.
Sure.
Otherwise, what are we criticizing?
And how are we developing a new society?
Are we?
Society. Everything is tech-based, right?
That's
but
right.
Then again, we do not know it's the future, right?
That's
So
right.
it's right now it's our opinions based on existing information, existing knowledge, right? So we do not know. Right? Okay, what about the real challenge? We write books. Some of us are not really keen. It doesn't matter how many books sell, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But if you really want to sell, say, 3,000 copies or 5,000 copies, right? There are a lot of challenges out there for writers, and you guys have been in this profession for quite some time. How do you see that this can be addressed, or is it has to be addressed, or not necessarily to be addressed?
Well, I think as a self-published writer, it has to be addressed. I can't just put money into printing books and then sit. I have to address them. Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about self-publishing, I have a point to add. When I speak to a few, for example, self-published, because my background is accounting, so I look at things differently. So they say, well, the whole thing cost me about only 2,000 ringgit to do. I paid someone editing and I printed a few copies, so it was like 1,600. So I'm happy with that. I sell a few copies and I'm okay. See? But I asked them, what about the time cost involved? And so, what do you mean time cost? So, your writing time. What about the thinking time? What about the research time, right? So, if you put in a cost to that, that whole thing is not a 2,000 ringgit project or 1,005, right? So, how do you intend to, recoup, right? But it's left open. It's left open. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? I didn't see it that way, right?
Yeah.
I can answer that.
Okay, sure.
Because, first of all, 2,000. Which printer charged you 2,000?
No, they put
Mine was
about.
never that. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's besides the point. I've done both self-publishing and traditional publishing. In both, as I said to you earlier, I write. That's the bliss. That's the creative part of me. Once that manuscript is ready, I become a business person. So, as a business person, you set up a business plan.
Sure.
You do the SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
You learn all the business aspects of it,
Sure,
marketing,
sure.
what you are able to do, what you're not able to do. That was how I did it because I had, exactly what you said. How much money did I put? How much thinking did I do?
Yeah.
And I had an Excel sheet,
Right.
and I had kept all the expenses, or photocopying, so on, so on, so on, so on. So and unit costs, and so I knew,
Sure.
exactly how much I had spent
Yeah.
in all that, from going to the library, the petrol costs, how
Sure.
much time I spent. What I didn't charge was, the creative part, the
Right.
thought part, because that was just for me.
Sure.
But everything else became business.
Yeah.
And then I worked out a unit cost for each one. And then at that time, I did research on the internet and as to how it is.
Yeah.
So if it is, say, Banana Leaf Men unit cost was 560. times 9. That's usually the denomination. 9 fiction. Nobody's going to pay 50 ringgit for fiction at that time. So I reduced it.
Right.
And then when you have the launch, you have all the usual things. You know, when you have a launch of any product, you never pay retail. On that day of the launch, you always pay, the person will sell it to you at a limited edition, you know, at a discounted rate and so on, just to cover costs. So by the time you come to the launch, you should have had your costs covered.
Yes.
Then everything else is profit.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I worked it.
Okay.
You know, but I had to go into business mode.
Sure. So as a self-publisher, you also wear the hat of an entrepreneur.
Yeah. It's the same with traditional publishing. You know, even if you submit, doesn't mean that just because somebody else assumes the risk, it isn't on you. Then you have to work out all the marketing. Are you prepared to pay this much? How much are you prepared to pay? What are you going to get back? So sitting there and saying, "Oh, I'm just expecting royalties to come flowing in," never going to work.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
You know, it's royalties are
it does not work, but for many people, writing is also not full time.
And royalties that you get as an individual, you have to declare to tax. I'm forever worried about tax. I'll just rather pay other
but
stuff.
the royalties, unless you sell thousands and thousands of copies, nobody's going to chase you for tax on that.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that feeling of achievement for many people that I wrote a book, that I spoke at some book launch or you know, some book reading, it's okay for them. For some others like yourself, you really want to make sure that you sell.
I'm afraid I'm not terribly okay. I know I have to go into business mode, entrepreneur mode, and all that, but I don't make it. It's not a matter of great importance to me, because I take a very long-term view on this. What is important is the copyright to my books, which I can hand down to my child, you know, say my daughter, and later on when she goes on to her children and so on. And the idea is that for me, what's important is a historical perspective. Because when I published this, I knew I was the first woman, Malaysian woman, to have published a novel in English. So historically, I am important.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. At some point, somebody will, at the moment, nobody is discovering it yet, you know, and they're all asking, are you sure? And of course I'm sure, because I did my market research first, right? Because there have been Malay women who have written in Malay. There have been women who have written in English, but they have not been novels. They have been mostly autobiographies, right? I'm the first novelist, a full-length novel. So there is that historical value, and therefore I know that people will be looking for my books well into the future, and that's it.
That is it.
Yeah.
So coming back to wrap up, that question will be, I think the objective is very important. Why do we write? Why do I write, right? When each one of us have established an objective, then if that objective is met, then it's okay, it's settled. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose we've covered most of it, right? And so thank you very much, Guat, for joining us this afternoon, and Aneeta. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to, you know, meeting you guys again, and maybe, you know, on a slightly different angle, and maybe another book from both of you, and we could always, you know, right? So thank you, and that's about it for today's opinions, and we'll keep you posted.